ahead and get started. Again, welcome to the Administering New Hampshire SAS Assessments webinar. We are excited that you're here. I know that a lot of you are probably looking at some information about the summatives coming up. I just wanted to let you know that we also have some folks here from Cambium. Right now, I have Evelyn Chester that's here, and we might have somebody else joining us as well. So we welcome them. So I'm going to be looking at the information myself and kind of doing it all today. Our moderator, Ann Mordecai, just had her internet go down with all of this wind. So bear with me if I'm not able to answer your questions right away, but I do have a lot of spots within the video in our PowerPoint where I ask and we'll pause for questions. So definitely ask them along the way and I'll get to them as soon as I can. So just a little bit about us. Again, I'm Heather Jenkins. I work for Demonstrated Success, and Mordecai as well. She will join us if for some reason she gets her internet back. But if you want to read a little bit more about us, you can take a peek at another time. First and foremost, we want to thank the DOE. They have sponsored this webinar series, so we appreciate them sponsoring this so that we can make this available for everybody. Again, we always say it, thank you again for your dedication to students. I say it every time and I will continue to say it. It is a lot, so we appreciate you taking the time to be here and really more importantly, everything that you're doing for your students. You are all muted, so you don't have to worry about us hearing anything. Again, ask questions. If you could put them in the Q&A section of Zoom rather than the chat, that will be helpful since I will be monitoring them sort of on my own. The chat goes out to everybody, but I am not going to necessarily be able to get to both of them. So if you do have a specific question, please put it in the Q&A. And one of the biggest questions that people have is, will you have access to this PowerPoint in this video and anything else we have? Yes, you will get an email with the link tomorrow to a certificate, to the copy of this PowerPoint and this where to find the video and any other documents that we might be able to share with you. So this is my gentle reminder. One, you are not alone. I am going to turn my camera off, but this is really a tricky time. And I know that with the summatives coming up, there's that added stress, but we want to make sure that you know that we're here to support you. We have a lot of different supports. So as we come here, we have us, so Ann and I, you can email us directly and we will answer any questions that we can. In addition, the Department of Education Office of Assessment, there's a link in this PowerPoint to their site. So if you have any questions or need any information, you can also contact them. And then lastly, but really more importantly, if you have really in-depth questions about the system and how things are working, the Cambium Help Desk is amazing. They answer questions really quickly. They're very helpful and they have a lot of obviously amazing information. This is designed by them and we have a lot of information, but Evelyn is here today. I leaned on her quite a bit for some of this information to make sure that we were getting everything sort of presented in the way that it should be. So they are invaluable in helping us as well. So our goals for today are, we're going to go through what the requirements are for the New Hampshire SAS assessments this spring. We're going to talk about how to administer the summatives and how to administer the modular and interim assessments and how to print some test tickets for your students so that they can get on to all of those different assessments as you assign them. Some questions from registration. This first question, we have been getting quite a bit. What happens if you're unable to administer the summative tests to all of your remote students? It is required that it is in person. I know a lot of people are going to be possibly opting out. I would really contact the DOE. I do not have a specific answer for that question. I know that they are recommending that the window be open. It's open as of March 8th, but they're also suggesting maybe waiting a little bit further into the testing window to see if you can get some of those students in person, but the DOE is probably your best bet for that. I am going to go and show you, there are necessarily any new features since you did the interims, but some features are going to be a little bit different for those summative assessments, so we'll talk about that. And then the recognition for out-of-state private schools that's made in TIDE or registration issues. Those are things also that if you are an administrator, it's not necessarily something I can answer here. I'm not sure if Evelyn, if you have any information about that, but I do not necessarily have information about the out-of-state private schools that students might be going to. The text-to-speech for students, I would recommend for the text-to-speech is going in and do in a practice setting to make sure that text-to-speech is in there. It's one of the accommodations, obviously, and just making sure that that is working the way that you want it to. And then we're going to go through a lot of information about the spring summatives and all of that as we go through this. So hopefully I'll be able to answer that question. I can see already that I have a few questions here. And for some reason, I cannot get to them. I'm not sure what's happening here. So I'm going to continue here and see if it will come. Yeah, I'm not sure where my Q&A is going. So I'm gonna escape sort of out of this and see if my Q&A will show up now. Nope. Okay. So I'll have to figure out, I apologize, the Q&A is not actually showing up on my screen and I am not 100% sure. Oh, there it is. It's behind. So sorry, this is what my screen looks like right now. We'll talk about remote proctoring and what tests you can have for remote proctoring. And if a student is fully remote, then they have to be in person to take the summatives. That is correct. And then if you have students that are remaining remote, then we have to figure out a way to get them in, or they're going to have to opt out. Okay, so in the practice test, it says text-to-speech is not active so that you cannot use that to test accommodations. Maybe you could use it in a modular assessment, which I can kind of show you what we're doing with those in just a little bit. So I'm going to get back to here. Okay, so just talking now about the summative requirements. So the U.S. Department of Education is requiring all states to administer their summative assessments. In spring, it's supposed to say 2021. And it's not necessarily the New Hampshire DOE that's making that need to be happening. There's a lot of different factors. So they are requiring in person for summatives. The New Hampshire SAS Summative Assessment administration window is March 8th through June 11th. The New Hampshire SAS Summative Assessments will be administered again in person. They need to be administered with a secure browser. You have to proctor or basically join a session and let students in for the summative assessments, and the at-home option and remote options are not available. In addition, from what I understand from the DOE, they are recommending that you administer the summative assessments in May to allow students to return to school in person, which was one thing that I had said a little bit earlier. So for the modular and interim assessments, this webinar is not just summatives, it's all the New Hampshire SAS assessments. So just some general information. There's no requirements for them, but general information for these. They're obviously optional for this time of year. I know you did the interims at the beginning, but for right now, these are optional assessments. These can be administered at any time. There's no testing window. They do not need to be administered in person, so you can do a remote session or you can do an at-home assignment for these. You do not need a secure browser, and you can administer these assessments again with or without a proctor or having to have kids join. And you can use the remote proctor option as well. So we'll talk about that as we go through. So as we're looking at certifications, one of the requirements of giving the New Hampshire SAS assessments is that you have to complete the test administration certification. This is not changed from what has been the requirement in the past. This is the specific one that we're talking about. So this is required for in-person testing. So anybody who is going to be administering a summative assessment this spring is going to need to do this test certification. There's also a remote TA certification. This is not required for all remote testing, or this is required for remote testing. So it won't be required for the summatives because that's going to be in person. In addition, if you took these certifications in the fall because you did the interims with students, you do not need to take these again in the spring. So sometimes it's a little bit tricky for people to remember which one they took or if they've taken both. So I'm just going to walk you through the steps of making sure you know how to do that. So for the test administration certification, so this is the in-person certification that you'll need for the summatives. You're going to go into the portal, which this is the link to the portal. You are going to choose test administration and then this test administration certification. This is the login information that you'll need to provide your login and password. And then it will start the certification here and you just push play and you run through it. This is not really changed since the fall of this past, the start of this school year. For the remote TA certification course, you are going to, again, go into the portal, go into test administration. You're going to use the remote TA certification course option, log in again, and then you'll have the start certification for the remote testing. I just want to check as I'm moving on to the next bit to see if I have more questions. I can see that they're coming in, but again, I'm having to come out of here to be able to look at the questions. I'm not sure why it's happening like this, but it is. So I can see them now. So we have, I don't know how to get a list of folks that completed the certification. Maybe Evelyn has an idea, but I don't know if it shows who's completed it. You do not. Go ahead.
Sorry, I was actually just about to type an answer to this. If you're a school or district coordinator, you should be able to use the users field in Tide to find users who have certifications. If you need help with that, the Cambium help desk can walk you through that process or even pull the list for you if you need them to.
Great. And then Evelyn, so you can see all the Q&A.
I can.
Would you mind feeding me the questions? Because clearly this is not working on my computer. I'm not really sure what's happening. So if you have anything that's really pressing, would you mind feeding that to me? That would be super helpful.
Yep. I'll read through them and give you an update at the next round.
Okay. Sounds great. Thank you. All right. So the next thing is all the different options for administering the New Hampshire SAS assessments. So when you log into the testing administration portal, you will get this screen. So you'll see that there's active, upcoming, and at-home assignments. So those are some of the options. So for an active session, this is a session that starts immediately. You automatically join the session and it's open and students are ready to start logging in and joining the session as well. This stays active until you stop or leave the session. And then students can either use a secure browser or a URL, depending on which assessment they're doing. Obviously, the summative is going to need the secure browser, but if you're doing a modular or an interim, you can use the URL or the secure browser. It doesn't, it's an option for those. For an upcoming session, this is a session that you schedule with a date range. It can be up to a 2-week window. Students can either use the secure browser or the URL. Again, for summatives, they have to use the secure browser, but for the modulars and the interims, they can use the URL. This is an upcoming session. This is one, once the session window opens, you'll have to join the session when it's time for your students to take the assessments, and we're going to walk you right through that. And then this session is active until you stop or leave the session as well. And then at-home assignments, these are scheduled using a date range, again, up to a 2-week window. You have to use a URL for this, and you do not need to be connected to the portal as a teacher while the students take the assessments. And the session is active until the end of the day on your testing window, and then it will go away after that 2-week time period. So for an active session and an upcoming session, you can again do these for the summatives, interims, or modulars. For an at-home assignment, the only options are interims and modulars. You cannot do the summatives as an at-home assignment. So our recommendations are for the summatives to use an active session. Students will need the spelling of their first name as it is in the system. So if it's spelled incorrectly in the system, they have to spell it incorrectly when they log in. If their name is Margaret and they go by Maggie, if Margaret's in the system, they have to use Margaret. They have their student code or SSID, and then the session ID. And we're going to walk all the way through this, but we just wanted to give you some general information for recommendations. For modulars and interims, if you want to monitor a student's progress as they take the assessment, then you're going to choose an active or upcoming session. You have to be on the system while the students are taking that assessment, and they can either use a secure browser or the URL. If you do not need to monitor student progress to see how they're kind of doing or how many questions they've gone through, then you can choose it as an at-home assignment, and students can take the assessment at any time. And again, they have to use a URL for that, for access to that particular assessment.
Heather, this might be a good time to answer some of the questions in the Q&A.
Okay.
So one thing that people had some questions about was the TA training.
Mm-hmm.
There was some confusion about remote training versus the standards training. Why do you need to do both, or why would you need the remote TA certification?
So the only way you would need the remote TA certification is if you were setting up any sort of test sessions with the remote option. If you know you're not going to do that, and all of the ways that you're going to be administering these is with an in-person option, then you do not need to take the remote certification. And I'm going to go into that a little bit when I talk about the difference between in-person and remote. But for the at-home assignment, even though kids might be remote and taking it remotely, you do not need to take the remote certification because you are not using the remote portion of the testing system. It has, video attached to it, and it uses your camera and all of that. So you will not need to take that unless you are going to specifically want to be in a sort of remote session with students using your camera and all of that. So the one that's going to be required for most of you is just going to be that regular test administration certification, because you're going to be doing most of the testing using the in-person option.
And then a few folks have asked about what grade level students will be testing at, because for the interims, we tested at the previous grade level, and they just want to make sure that they know what grade to test for the summatives.
Yes, it's your current grade level. You are not doing previous grade level for these particular assessments. So the summatives, again, current grade level. Okay. Anything else? Good to move on? Okay. All right, so now let's get into the how we're going to administer the New Hampshire SAS assessments. So here we go. Step one, we're going to go into the portal. So again, this is the same URL we're using for everything to get to this main screen. If you don't have the URL or you're not sure, if you just type in New Hampshire SAS in Google, it's the first thing that comes up. So you can always look for it that way. Again, we're choosing test administration. And then here's our 9-box page. For this, we're going to choose test administration right up at the top. And then you're going to log in. And you're going to come to this screen. So this is where you're going to choose the type of session. So you have your active session, which is happening right now. Your upcoming session, which is one that you can schedule for a specific time period and is open for a little bit longer than just doing an active session. And then at-home assignments is one that you're going to use for those that you're not wanting to necessarily have to open up, join a session, allow kids to get in. They're able to do it sort of on their own time. So creating an active session. If you're here and you want to talk about how to administer the summatives, this is where you really want to be paying close attention. We are recommending that, just like in the past, that you create an active session for the summatives. So we're going to walk through that process right now. We would choose active session, and then we're going to choose start new session. And then you have all of these options here. If you do this today, you will not have all of these options. You will not have the summative option until March 8th. So just so you know, that will start showing up as of March 8th. So I want to choose summative. So as soon as I choose that, I get to this screen here and it asks me which subject I want. You want to use the plus sign. Basically, rule of thumb, if there's a plus sign, use the plus sign. If you don't use the plus sign, what's going to happen is all of these assessments show up on the right-hand side. So if you just clicked on math, even though you might be a 5th grade teacher, it shows you every single grade. So what you want to do is make sure you use that plus sign. So here we are. I'm going to use a plus sign. I open math, and it shows me the assessments I can choose from. And then I choose my assessment. As soon as I do that, my assessment has the check mark there and shows up in the upper right-hand side so I can see this is what I'm going to be administering. And then here is that in-person or remote. Again, the summatives can only be done in person. So if I chose remote, then I get this particular error message. You can see over here that I had remote, and then I get this sort of error message. It will not allow us to do that. So if we go back, so we've got it to in person at this point, and then all I'm going to do is say start live session. So active session is live. We're going to, as soon as we do that, we get this particular screen. We have, you're automatically, the session has already started. You don't hit start or anything from that. Students will need this session ID to log into the active session. So the way that this will work is that you will, if you have like a little sample test ticket or what have you, I'm going to show you how to print some of these a little bit later in the presentation, but they will need, again, the correct spelling of their first name as it is in the system, their SSID, and they'll be good to go from there. This is where that information about the session ID is important. This is something that you probably will put up on your board for students to be able to enter in. Because we are using a secure browser on this, this does not automatically populate. So you do want to have that information handy where students can see it to be able to log in. So they just fill in all of this information. After they fill in this information, they get to their screen to say, is this you? And if it's them, they say yes. And then they will get the assessment or assessments that you have in an active window. And they choose that. Once they choose that, they'll get the screen that says waiting for approval. So this will stay like this until you as a teacher go in to this little approvals area and allow them and approve them to be able to come into the session. So before approving students, you just want to make sure that their test settings are correct, like their accommodations and all of that. So just keep that in mind. It's just like you've done in the past, make sure everything is good to go for students. So once approved, the students will begin the testing process. So that's where you start to hear the little doo-doo-doo-doo-doo when they're trying to test their sound and their video and all of that, depending on which assessment they are going to be starting. To stop an active session, you're on your teacher page here, you just click stop and then okay, and the session is complete. If this was something that as you sign this, you set this test session up, as you created it as an active session, that means the session goes away completely and you'll have to open another test session if you have kids needing to either finish or setting up a different test. So just a heads up on that. So I'll just pause here to see if there's any questions about the summatives or active sessions in general. Okay. So Evelyn, you can just stop me if for some reason you have any other questions as we're kind of going. Okay, the next thing that I want to talk about is scheduling a test session in advance or creating an upcoming session. This is what we are recommending for when you're setting up modulars or interim assessments. It is possible to set it up a summative assessment as an upcoming session. So you definitely can do that and it will have a window open and you'll just need to join it each time you need students to be able to join. But for the most part, we're sort of recommending that you do an active session for the summatives, but know that this is an option here as well. So again, we're in here, we're going to choose upcoming session. As soon as we do that, we're going to choose schedule a session. We are able to put in a date range of up to 14 days. So you'll just put in your start date and your end date. As soon as those are in, you'll click next. And then again, you have these options. If you went in today, you're not going to see summatives again. That'll be after March 8th. But for this example, I'm going to choose modulars. As soon as I choose modulars, again, we're remembering use the plus sign. The modulars have a lot more plus signs, so just keep that in mind. So you use the plus sign and then you get your grade level. You choose a specific grade level and you get all of the modulars. I would need to scroll down to see all of them. There are quite a few for 5th grade, but you choose your specific modular assessment. And as soon as you do that, you'll see this is checked and then your modular shows up on the right-hand side. Very similar to doing an active session, but this session has a date range where you're able to continue with the same session. As you're filling this out, you want to enter a session name. I highly recommend making it as distinct as possible for you to understand which assessment it is, because when you're in the reporting portal, if you don't put in exactly which modular it is, it's a little bit tricky to figure out when you're looking at reporting, especially if you're doing more than one modular. So there's this area here where we have in-person or remote. This is where I want to get into a little bit more information about the difference between the two. So here it is, in-person. So this option is intended to be used with students who are in person. The remote option is intended to be used with students who are at home. Some of the major differences is the in-person option does not use a camera in the portal. The remote option does. You're able to use the camera, you're able to connect with a student, and they're able to kind of raise their hand, tell you that they've got an issue because they are technically not there. And then the in-person option, you cannot interact with students through the portal in that you aren't able to kind of talk with them. You can see how they're doing and how many questions they've answered, but for the most part, they should be sitting pretty much right with you. So you're not really connecting through the portal, where the remote option does allow you to connect with students that way. So the in-person and remote option are able to be used on active sessions or upcoming sessions. Again, if you are doing the summatives, you will not be able to use the remote session at all. It will give you that error. So it's the in-person and remote is really used right now mostly for modulars or interims. Okay, so if we're going through, I just want to hop back up here. If we choose, it doesn't matter which type I choose, whether it be in person or remote, I am going to get to this screen next, and it's going to ask me to assign a test reason. This is something that was a little bit of a nightmare for folks with the interims. If you're working at a specific grade level, and you want to be able to see how that grade level did as a whole, you have to use the same test reason. So that was a little bit tricky with the interims in the fall. We recommend that you keep it unassigned, and then there'll never be any issue with that. You can still look at it with your specific, if you're rostered, you can see just your group, or you could see the grade as a whole, depending on what your permissions are in that reporting portal. But again, we recommend you keep it as assigned, and that just makes it easy for everybody. So as soon as you've got your test reason, you just click OK. And this will come up. So this is what you will see for the modular assessments and the interims. If you are choosing summatives, for an upcoming session, you will not see a URL because it requires a secure browser. So that portion will not show up if you were doing a summative right now. Because I'm doing a modular, you will see that the URL there because it is an option. You don't need to use a secure browser for interims or modulars, just the summative. So now I can see my upcoming session and general information about it here. As I look through this, I can click on the share link. If I need to see that link again, or I didn't make a copy of it or look at it as I set the session up, I can always go back in and it will bring that link back up. Again, if you're doing the summatives, you will not see the URL. It's a little bit confusing. It says share link, but if this was a summative assessment, all that it would show you would be that session ID. And then the next thing is you can edit it. So if you go through and you say, oh man, I just chose the wrong modular. I was supposed to do B instead of A. You can edit and it brings you right through those screens again, and you can change your assessment and then save it, and it's all set still for an upcoming session. So once the window of your upcoming session starts, it now shows up in your active sessions tab. So we're going to pretend that it's basically March 8th or beyond. And this is showing up now in my active sessions. And so now my upcoming session has turned into an active session. The difference is that it has a date range here. And so it doesn't automatically open up the session on the 8th. I still have to go in and I have to share the link with my students again, or put it up on the board or whatever. Again, if it's a summative, you're not going to have the URL. And this particular active session, because there's a date range, I have to click join. If you don't join, your students can't come in. You can't let your students in. Basically, it's just sitting here and the test session isn't really open. So this is how you open it. You click join and it brings you to this screen. So just like with the active session, the upcoming session now is active because I've joined it. I will then have, for this here, you can see here's my session ID and everything. If I were to give my students that URL to log into, they're just going to enter this information because their session ID is going to automatically populate. If you're doing a secure browser for any of it or doing the summatives, it will not give you the session ID. You'll have to provide that to students and they'll have to enter that in. So again, students will come to this page. They're going to have to say, yes, this is me. And then they'll be able to start their modular and they're going to be waiting for approval, and you let them in just like you did with the active session. Okay, so any questions? Probably
We have some questions, Heather. And I'm just going to go through them in the order that they came in. So the one question was, she tried to give an 8th grade science modular to grade 6 students, but the students didn't have access to the test because they're not in grade 8. And she wants to know, am I only able to give them grade 5 modulars? I'm going to go ahead and just answer that, Heather, if that's okay.
Sure. Yep.
So the answer is you absolutely can give a grade 8 test to your grade 6 students, but you'd need to go into TIDE and change their interim testing grade. By default for the fall, we gave everyone's interim testing grade their previous grade. So all 5th graders had grade 4, etc. But we wouldn't have made it so that 6th graders were automatically eligible for those grade 8 tests, but that's absolutely something you can do in TIDE. And if you have questions about how to change that interim testing grade, definitely reach out to the help desk or check the TIDE user guide, and that will help you with that.
Great.
And the next question is 2 hours the general length of time needed for completion? We recommend that you plan for about 2 hours and 15 minutes for the summative tests, but they don't have to take it all at once. If you need to stop for lunch or whatever, if it's going to be more than 20 minutes, your students will not be able to resume the test. We'll be able to resume the test, but won't be able to answer any previously answered items. There's a built-in pause rule. You can go ahead and stop the session, and that'll pause everyone's test. Once you do that, once you stop the session and pause everyone's test, when you resume after lunch or later in the week, you can just start a new session and provide that new session ID to the students. I apologize that you can hear my husband in his meeting at the same time.
It's our world.
It's the life, yeah. And you do not need to go into TIDE to update any of the tests for students' current grade level. By default, students will be able to take the summatives in their current enrolled grade. Another question, what happens if the scheduled session expires before the test is completed by all students? You can go ahead and create a new session for those students and they can keep testing. And I'm gonna let Heather take this one. How do you know what modular test to give?
Yeah, that's a really good question. There are quite a few options. If it depends on what the reason that you're giving it. Are you giving it as for a specific unit to see how kids did on the skills maybe that you've taught? Then you want to make sure that you're choosing the specific modular assessment that goes with that domain or that content level or content area of what you're trying to assess. If you are trying to use a modular assessment sort of as a practice, I would suggest you go into the assessment viewing application and take a peek at some of those modulars. You can always look at them. That's the assessment viewing application is just that. You view it so that you can see what the questions are before you give it to students. You can use modular assessments through the assessment viewing application and use them as questions of the day. Put them up on the board or put them up on your Zoom and say, hey, everybody, take a peek at this. This is one of the questions that you would get. How would you solve this? What are some of the things that you might need to be able to know to be able to figure this question out? Is this, have you never used a number line maybe? And this is how we use a number line and manipulate the information. So it really depends on the purpose for why you're administering a modular assessment. But there's a lot of different information that I can give you. We do a whole program that we have been working with the modular assessments with a lot of schools and sites. So I have a ton of information about modulars. So again, it's Heather Jenkins at Demonstrated Success. You'll see my contact information. If you want to email me directly, we can maybe talk about that. And I can help you figure out what might be best for you.
And there's another question here about if I've created some test sessions as a test, is there a way to delete them?
Yes. Yes. So if you're talking about a test session that's an upcoming session, there's a delete button right there. But if you are doing an active session and you realize, oh my gosh, this is not what I want, you just stop the session and it's done. So.
And a question about if you stop a test and later start a new session, can students go back to answer or change answers in the part of the test worked on prior to stopping the test? I'll go ahead and answer that. This depends on how long the test was paused for. There's what we call a pause rule for 20 minutes. Hold on. Where if the student's test is paused for 20 minutes or less, they can go back and work on their previous questions, their previously answered items, etc. If the test is paused for 20 minutes or longer, or 21 minutes or longer, then they can't. So if it's a 5-minute stretch break, they can go back in and keep working on what they were working on. If it's 30 minutes for lunch or longer, then they're not going to be able to go back and change their answers to those previously answered items. They'll be taken to the first unanswered question on the test.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Let's see. What else? I think, oh, and then there was a question about, let's see. Are accommodations saved from the fall in tide? Yes, they are. And someone who wants to know if we can talk about the ELA summatives.
For how you would administer them, it's the same way as you would do the math. The ELA math and science are all the same. You just choose the specific summative that you would like to administer. And you set up the session as an active session or an upcoming session. So it's the same. I just chose math, but it's the same for ELA and for science for grades 5, 8, and 11.
That's correct. I think the question was about the fact that there's both a reading and a writing component to the ALA test.
Yep.
And the reading test must be administered prior to the writing test.
Yes.
That also segues into another question about the writing test. The pause rule doesn't apply for the writing test. So if a student is paused for more than 20 minutes, they should be able to go back in and continue working on their essay. Because we understand sometimes you have to break for lunch while they're in the middle of writing their essays, but they can go back and keep writing.
Great.
All right, Heather, I'm going to let you keep going, and we'll take another break for questions in a little bit.
Okay, great. All right, so now we're going to talk about scheduling an at-home assignment. Again, this is for modulars and interims only. You cannot do a summative assessment this way. We're going to be on that at-home assignments tab. And so, again, not for summatives. And if you try to set up a summative this way, this is the error code that you're going to get. So right here, I want to go live. I thought it would just be nice to show you the portal live and just show you how to do the at-home assessments that way. So I'm going to just open up here. So I'm in the portal here. I go to test administration again. I log in. And here are, this is live. These are some of the things that I've been kind of just, putting in as active sessions or upcoming sessions. So I have some things in here. Here's some at-home assignments that I've put in, but I just want to walk through how you would create an at-home assignment. So I'm on the tab here, and I'm going to do create an assignment. You will not get this particular page. It'll come right to here for you. And then you're able to choose your date range. So you can put any date range that you want for your students to be able to access this assessment. Now, again, the at-home assignment, you don't need to let anybody in, and students can work at their own time. So if they want to get in at 8:30 at night, they can get in at 8:30 at night, and you don't have to click and allow them in or anything. They're just going to get the URL and put in their name, their SSID, and log right in there. So you just set up your time frame here. So I will set it up for here to here, and I just click next. Now these are my options here for right now. And let's just, since I haven't done interim, I could do interim. And again, plus symbol if you have one. So we'll do the plus here. And then you can see the reading here and the writing. So I would do this here. And then I would choose which grade level I wanted to be able to administer here. And then just so that we're clear, the interim assessments for ELA, you can have the students do an interim ELA the way that you did in the fall, but just know you also have to put in the writing portion for you to get any of the information about how they did. So students have to do the ELA first, and then they do the writing, and then their scores come up in the reporting portal. So just keep that in mind when you're doing ELA interims. If for some reason you just want to check and do an interim, this is the same way I would do it for a modular, except that you don't have to choose both. Modulars are just kind of one-offs, so they're a lot shorter. They're like For math, they're 8 to 10 questions. For ELA, they can be up to about 20, 22 questions, but they're definitely not as long as what a summative or an interim is. Again, I'm looking here. I need to figure out a session name. So I would call this grade 5 ELA interim. And then all you do here is you save the assignment. Again, keep your test reason, just keep it as unassigned. And then you can click OK. This is how students will be able to log in. So you'll give them this URL. You can put it up on your Google Classroom, and then students just need to have their first name and their SSID to be able to get into this particular session. Now, this session they will not be able to get into until tomorrow because I set it up for tomorrow, but anytime between tomorrow and the 9th, they should be able to get in as long as they have that URL. Again, if you need the URL again, you just click here and we'll show you it here. And then if I need to edit it, or I chose the wrong thing, or if I forgot to put on the writing with the reading portion, I can edit that and go from there. It will update it, or I can just delete it if I don't want to have it here anymore. Maybe I decided not to do it, or I goofed, or whatever. You can delete it from there. So these are, you can, even though it says at-home assignments, you don't have to have kids at home to do them. You can do them in your classroom. I was just talking with somebody today about doing not necessarily an interim, but using the modulars and doing them as an at-home assignment, but in class. Just because it's just easier, you don't have to, join a session and let all the kids in or whatever. You're just kind of walking around your room and seeing how kids are doing. So it's a really sort of easy way to be able to do your modular assessments as well, and to have kids practice. So think about that. They don't have to be remote or at home to be able to use that at-home assignment.
Heather, this is a great opportunity for this question, which is, what is the difference between an interim and a modular?
Great question. So the interim is a little bit more like the summative in that it is testing all different areas and all the standards over many domains. So if we're talking math and you're talking 3rd grade, you're doing the interim will have numbers and operations base 10, numbers and operations fractions, measurement data and geometry, and all of your domains that you have. For a modular, you pick a specific domain that you want to look at. So if you are doing a fraction unit, you can choose a modular that just has the standards, the questions that are associated with numbers and operations and fractions. So the modulars are more pinpointed in the standards that they're covering, and they're a lot shorter. In addition, the reporting portal for the modulars is, it's a lot easier for you to see where kids are, where their gaps are, because every single student gets the same question. So for a modular, for math, let's say you have 10 questions, every student is taking the exact same assessment. So they're getting the same 10 questions. So you could see question 7, kids really didn't do well on. Well, what standard is that attached to? And what do I need to maybe reteach or teach in a different way to make sure that they're understanding? The interims, because there are so many different areas and because students aren't given the exact same questions, so question 1 for one person might be question 8 for another person, and the 3rd person might not get that question at all. So what is happening there is that you are not able to see and pinpoint as well where the gaps are for students. So the modulars are really a good way to figure out and pinpoint, this is what I'm teaching now, this is what the kids need, or this is what they're already getting. Does that make sense? Okay. All right, so that is the at-home assignments. So I'm going to go back to my PowerPoint here. And just any other questions about at-home assignments before we move on? I know I'm very aware of the time, and we have 4 minutes left, and I have a little bit to get through for printing test tickets and just some general resources. So, but if you have something right now, definitely go ahead and ask. And Evelyn, you can interrupt me if I'm going and you need to put a question in.
Yep. I'm just going to go ahead and answer this one real quickly because it's come up a couple of times, which is, if teachers took the TA certification in the fall, they do not need to do it again. So if you took your TA certification prior to administering the interims this fall, you are set and you do not need to take it for the spring. It carries through for the whole 2020 to 2021 school year.
Great.
Okay.
All right. So TIDE system, imprinting your student test tickets. So logging into TIDE is the same. We've got the same URL. You go into test administration, and this time we're going to choose TIDE here. And you log in, and then you have this screen here. And what you're going to do is go to print testing tickets. And from here, you're going to print from student list. So here it brings you to this screen, and you're able to choose your district and school. So we put those in, and then grade level when assessed. And so you'll choose your grade level there, and then you'll choose search. This will bring up this screen, and then you'll choose view results. And it will bring up your students here. And you can, to print the test tickets, you can select individually students that you want to print test tickets for, or if you use that checkup at the top, it selects all of your students. So if you're trying to do it for all your students, then that would be the way to go. As soon as you select your students, you're going to click on this little print button, and then it will bring up this selection screen. And so what you want to choose here is my selected tickets. And then you want to choose test tickets here. You can choose what layout you would like. As soon as you choose test tickets and have your layout, you just click on print. You will think that it would just pop right up, but it doesn't. It comes down at the bottom of your screen here. It's now a PDF for you. So you open up that PDF and you're able to print it however you would like. So this is kind of a sample of what it might look like. So just a heads up, when students are logging into the system, they need to have that exact spelling of their first name. And you can also, if you don't want to print a test ticket, you can also look up the student information on the TA interface. So on this screen here where we had that live session, you can see it says student lookup. So you could look up a specific student. It's been, we understand that a lot of kids don't necessarily go by the name that's in the system. As a specific example is I had a student, his name was actually John, but he went by Jack. So trying to type in Jack for his first name was incorrect. He needed to put in John, even though he never goes by that. Or if for some reason their information is entered incorrectly into the TIDE system, whether it be it's incorrect in PowerSchool for you or whatever, it will upload incorrectly as well into here. So they just need to use this exact spelling of their first name. So anything else about test tickets or any other questions? I'll move on here because we've got some other helpful information. I want to point folks in the direction of going into the test administration resources. It's ridiculously amazing the amount of information is in there that people have no idea about. So I want to show you just a little bit. Again, you're going into the portal, going into test administration, and this time I'm going to go into test administration resources. And you get all of these options on the left-hand side here. What I want to show you right now quickly is these system manuals and user guides. There's a lot in there, but I've kind of pasted on this screen some of the ones that I think would be really useful for you. So here they are. So there's a TA user guide. There's a TIDE user guide. There's a New Hampshire SAS accommodations guide. And then there's the New Hampshire SAS test administration manual. All of those things are there under system manuals and user guides. Again, there's a lot more in there as well, but these are some of the user guides that might help you if you have some questions. So I have wrap up and questions. It sounds silly, but I do want to show you a couple of other things that are in this test administration resources that might be helpful for you. Under general information, if you go for teachers, there's a lot of information here where you have your performance level descriptors for ELA and math. People don't know that these exist, and I'm just kind of making sure that everybody knows these resources are available. So if I look at grade 5, PLDs for English Language Arts, it has every single standard and what somebody who is proficient or highly proficient would be doing with that standard, and then kids that might be a level 2 or a level 1. So this really spells out what kids need to be doing to be proficient or highly proficient in each one of the standards. Again, not a lot of people know that these exist. In addition, there's rubrics for writing, so you can see how students are being scored and what the rubrics look like for those. So if I were to look at grade 3 through 5, information and explanatory, this will tell me how kids are scoring a 4, a 3, a 2, and a 1 on this particular type of writing. And then these are also huge. These vocabulary lists, this has every grade level in here. So if we look at grade 6 here, this is the vocabulary that students will need to be familiar with for the New Hampshire SAS assessments. These are some of the terminology that might be used. Somebody was talking to me earlier and they said, it was interesting, the students finished up, when they did the interims, they said, well, what's a multi-paragraph? And she said, oh my gosh, that just means more than one paragraph, but they didn't understand what multi-paragraph meant when they were doing their writing assessment. So just take a peek at those. There's a ton of information, but I'll stop there. And we'll go here. Are there any other questions?
There's one in the Q&A. How long does it take to get student scores for the summative test?
They're pretty much, as soon as they're done, they're there.
And a related question, where do teachers go to access scores or reports from the modulars?
Okay, I will show you here. We'll get back to this test administration. Here's your 9-box page. Here's reporting. So this is where you go in and you'll be able, I would have to choose a district, but if you are with a specific district, your district will show up and you'll be able to see any of the, you'll be able to see your interims from the fall. You'll be able to see any of the modulars. They'll be called benchmarks in the reporting portal. And then you will also be able to see your summatives right there. If you have trouble viewing that, you can just reach out, but it's right in this reporting window here.
All right, a couple more questions. Can the rubrics be copied and shared with students?
Yes, please.
And, and are the summative writing scores readily available?
The summative writing scores, did they say?
Yes.
It's the same thing. As soon as a student is done, it's pretty much automatic. It's for modulars, interims, and summatives. They are all available as students finish. The only difference with that is with the ELA, they have to complete the writing before the reading scores show up. So they have to do both for the ELA, and then the scores will show up. But for modulars, as soon as the kids are done with the modular, it's there. Same thing with like a math summative or whatever. When the kids are done, they show up.
And I think I apologize earlier, my battery died while we were doing Q&A, so I was trying to avoid the background noise. So if there were any questions that didn't get answered, please feel free to re-ask them.
So I'll go through the next few slides and we will go from there. We have some more webinars coming up this month. If you just go to our website and you choose the data coaching. So we have today's, which is the Administering New Hampshire SAS Assessments. We have one coming up on the 9th, which is interesting. We have, this is Ken Darsney is going to be doing a New Hampshire SAS Modular as your benchmark assessment. He has, his school has switched and they are doing using modulars as end of unit assessments. So just if you're interested in what that might look like, he's going to be doing a webinar on the 9th. I will be doing a webinar on using Excel to view your assessment results. It's more of a beginner / advanced, and then we have an intermediate and advanced one coming up for Excel as well. And then it's not on here, but on March 30th, we have this same webinar. We'll be doing again on March 30th, and then again on April 13th. And the last thing is we have all these past webinars from the basically 2020-21 timeframe. And then all of our webinars are available, they're recorded and available on YouTube. So you can just go right to YouTube and type in demonstrated success and they show up. This is the information I was talking about where I've been working with a lot of sites to understand the modular assessments and how to use them. It's a free program sponsored by the DOE, just basically showing folks how to use them, what the benefits are. So if you have any want or need for that, you can also contact me. You can follow us on Twitter and Facebook and LinkedIn and Instagram. We have a lot of great information. We've been putting out some teacher resources, just some general information about upcoming trainings and some good sort of educational information on there. And then here's who's here to support you. Basically, there's me, Heather Jenkins, and then Ann Mordecai. Again, she wasn't able to be here because of her internet, but she's a great resource for anything New Hampshire SAS as well. Cambium, again, they're your people when it talks and have any questions specifically about the portal. And then the New Hampshire DOE has an Office of Assessment that you can take a peek at on their website.